Hey everyone, Margarita here. Today is Wednesday, March 12th, 2025, and I'm going to start talking about the hyperbaric oxygen treatments, otherwise known as HBOT. And what I'm going to start with in this video is some of the crimes that were going on at the center that I had been at for 6 years. I was a patient from March of 2019 until current, and they recently shut all of the chambers down and arrested the owner and several employees because a 5-year-old boy blew up inside the chamber. Now, I had experienced numerous negative interactions with the first woman I'm going to talk about personally in the beginning of me treating for the first 2 years at the Troy location. It's called Oxford Recovery Center. That was the name of it at the time I started treating. And after this woman was eventually let go in 2021, they changed their name to the Oxford Center. Now, the owner's name is Tamala Peterson. She does own both Brighton and Troy centers. And she was at the top directing the first woman I'm going to talk about, Casey Diskin. I'm not even sure if that's her real name. She used so many different fake names and stole somebody's credentials, so I'm not even exactly sure if that's technically her real name. But numerous incidents had occurred with myself. And when I first started treating at this center, I was not sure if I was going to live or not yet. I mean, I knew I wasn't going to live if I didn't receive treatment. Also, same with my son, and he was only 3 at the time. So I knew if we did not receive treatment, if we did not begin treatment somewhere, and I knew the treatment was hyperbaric oxygen, I just could not get it from anywhere. The hospital system is not built to give it to you, and they're not taught to check for carbon monoxide poisoning properly or how it works. So at this point, it had been 14 months from the time my injury was very extreme. We slowly went further and further downhill, could not go anywhere, completely homebound, completely sick. Brain swelling, suffocation, 50, 60, 70 severe symptoms at once, both of us at the same time, stayed that way for years. And it stayed that way the first couple of years into treatment as well, until we had cleared enough of the carbon monoxide and repaired enough of the blood-brain barrier and the brain tissue in order to get us to a place where we had crossed a threshold finally where there was a light at the end of the tunnel, not knowing if we were going to live or not that entire time. So the reason we ended up there is due to my mother's ongoing crimes and her criminal involvement with working at Beaumont Hospital for 45 years, falsifying our medical records when we very first became injured, seeking treatment, inserting herself behind the scenes, not in front of me, but pulled physicians and other people in our care aside from our room, told them things that were not true. They went on those delusions that they were told and entered false information into our medical charts. Now, this happened on numerous occasions, so every time I tried to seek treatment down the line, I'd still be left with no treatment, and each time this occurred, I'd be left in a more extreme state than I was before I sought treatment. And when I sought treatment, I was already in a very extreme state, and I remained in a very extreme state. My son and I both for about 3 years. So 14 months from the time we had found the center, and then an additional almost 2 years from the time we reached the first light at the end of the tunnel. So we were in a very extreme state. We had no choice but to seek treatment at Oxford Recovery Center. There was no other way for us to get treatment. There was no other private hyperbaric facilities at that time, not within driving distance. And we were so incapacitated, and I did not have the ability to barely stand up, move from room to room. I could not travel from point A to point B. My brain was in a continuous state of swelling, sagging, throbbing. Every breath I took, every exhaled breath radiated extreme pain through every nerve of my brain, and every sound did the same thing, and it stayed that way my entire brain, and all of the blood-brain barrier on the entire brain was completely blown away and blasted away, disintegrated down to nothing. So when I started treatment, there was none, and I had to begin repairing it and removing the carbon monoxide from a cellular level within my tissues, and my son was in the same state from birth, and then got a little bit worse after that because we were unaware something had happened until he was 2, once I became overloaded, and then we figured it out backwards. So because of all that, it forced us to treat at this center, and I'm going to show you the news clip of the woman that was extorting me. I had private insurance that was willing to pay, and it was not their responsibility to pay. This was technically a workers' comp situation, and the place who'd caused the injury, because I'd started at 30 weeks pregnant, then left there, gave birth while suffering from it, then returned separately, and then overloaded. So now this woman, she was charging me the full price of treatment up front and refusing to bill my private insurance, who was not responsible for paying, but agreed to pay because they knew they understood it was a medical emergency. They understood the state that I was in. Now there is about 100 to 150 hours of phone calls recorded with me on the phone with my private insurance, Blue Care Network, where I was screaming, crying, yelling, begging, and pleading for enough oxygen to stay alive and be in a comfortable place, because the state that I was forced to live in was extremely intolerable. Having that many symptoms at once, being in that extreme of a state, and suffocating, and living in an altered state of consciousness, all of these things, severe nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, all of these symptoms all at once, all day, every day, no break from it. So I had no choice but to go with this center and deal with these people, because at that time in 2019, there was no way for us to get treatment, and I didn't have the ability to try to keep seeking treatment. It was causing more harm, and I was in a worse place every time I'd get back because I wasn't receiving any help in any which direction. So now I know part of that is due to my mother's actions, and I was in such an extreme state I was not able to figure that out before. But what I want to show is the clip from the lady who I had direct contact with, who kept refusing to bill my insurance. She had all these excuses why my insurance can't be billed. The funny thing is I actually went to school for medical billing. I just never got in the field, so I understand how it all works. And she did not know that. So she portrayed herself to have certain certifications that she did not have. And then she was trying to say it worked a certain way when I said, no, that's not how it works. This is how it works. And then she tried to say, and they never returned my money either. And I do believe that was coming from Tamala Peterson, the owner. She was directing her to not, directed them to not give me my money back. But then they eventually let me ride that 20 grand out in treatments over time. However, I needed the money back in my pocket. I was very unwell, paying all these bills, being forced to work. I could barely stand up. I was barely able to, I shouldn't have been trying to work, let alone standing or driving or getting anywhere at that point. But I had no choice, or we were not going to live. So I did those things, and I could not talk about it. I couldn't tell anyone that they were extorting me, or I knew we were not going to live. She made numerous mistakes. She tried to bill it under one of the other family members' names, so it got rejected initially, trying to say, see, it's rejected, not knowing I actually know how it all worked, and I saw exactly what the mistake was. So it took months of this, going back and forth, me paying up front for treatment. Once I found treatment, I had to get myself significantly ahead of my son, so it was just me at first, and then I continued to call my insurance and say, she did this wrong, she did that wrong, now she's refusing this, she's refusing to bill, they're refusing to give me my money back. I had a $4,000 out-of-pocket maximum per year. So that means no matter how many treatments I receive, you can't charge me more than $4,000 for the entire year out of my own pocket. So she continued to charge more than that. It went on for a couple years. It was about 2 years. And this woman, Casey Diskin, was at the forefront of that, with Tamala Peterson directing her what to do at the top. At some point, once my insurance, they had numerous encounters with her, having to contact her. I don't know at what point Casey Diskin got removed from doing any of the billing, or maybe it was just my case. She was not allowed to do any of the billing or touch my claims at a certain point, because I had called out so many things that were wrong with what she was doing and illegal. But then I kept getting threatened, and I was not allowed to talk about it. And I knew if I talked, we were going to be dismissed from treatment and we weren't going to live. So it didn't matter how you look at it. I had to do whatever they were saying. Either way, my son and I were not going to live. We're just now in a place where, we're in a way better place than we were. We are still walking a pretty fine line between life and death. It is exposure based. So if we have any exposures to anything, we do become near death very fast. So there is still an ongoing problem. It's just not where we live every second of every day near death, with extreme symptoms every second of every day. They're more waxing and waning, more severe once there's exposures to things. So we live modified lives. So that is how we have to go about things or again, we would not be alive. We cannot just go out and about in the world like regular people. We can't just do whatever we want. There's periods where we have to shelter in place still, which is currently going on right now. So I'll get more into that in its own episode, but I do want to talk about Casey Diskin first, and then I will talk about the charges brought up on the owner, Tamala Peterson, and what else happened in a different video. So this is going to be the first one. It took about 3 years for this case to, 3 years? It was like 3 years before this case actually played out in court. But this woman is now in prison for 4.5 to 7 years, and I am having to go talk to the police in a few days over all of these two women's actions. So that's why I'm filming this video, because I'm going to go, I'm going to show all the receipts from my health insurance mixed with my actual receipts and the dates of all this that went on, because it went on for a very long time. Not only that, but this woman also threatened my life, and she told me over the phone shortly before I got to treatment the one day that it would be such a shame if I died in the chamber, and then demanded payment up front every time I came to treat. So it doesn't matter. I had private insurance willing to pay, and at this point I had like over a $10,000 credit, I believe. Now, I'm going to play the news clip, and this is her, and then I'll get to the owner's news clip.
Tonight, vindication for numerous parents who claim their autistic children suffered because of this woman, Casey Diskin, who worked at the Oxford Recovery Center in Brighton. Today, she was sentenced for her crimes. It's an update to my report that first aired back in 2021, which revealed how the convicted felon who stole medical credentials was masquerading as a certified behavioral specialist, treating the most vulnerable children.
I worry not only for Kennedy, but for other families who may unwillingly place their trust in this institution.
Kim Harden led the charge back in 2021 when Fox 2 first exposed how Casey Diskin was a dangerous fraud, posing as a board-certified autism specialist. Like Harden's daughter, Diskin worked with severely autistic children, mostly nonverbal, at the Oxford Recovery Center in Brighton. In a Livingston County courtroom, one by one, parents spoke about how their vulnerable children regressed after the treatment they received under Diskin's care, who Fox 2 revealed was knowingly hired as a convicted felon.
You took upwards of over $15,000 from our family and precious times that we can never get back. The irreplaceable mental, emotional, psychological, physical health and well-being of my family and so many others is unforgivable.
In 2021, I exposed how Diskin had been stealing the medical and insurance credentials of Dr. Kimberly Peck. She lied about her education and promised to help cure autistic children with a new ABA treatment program she created that was also backed and praised in online videos by her COO, Tammy Peterson.
Far more severe than my own personal turmoil. I truly lose sleep over the number of families that have been put at risk because until now, no one has stopped her.
Until my Fox 2 investigation that sparked a probe by the Attorney General's office. In 2023, Diskin was charged with 16 felonies, including identity theft, intimidating a witness, and posing as a health professional. In August, she pleaded guilty to 9 of those felonies and has been locked up ever since. Before she was sentenced, Diskin addressed the court and apologized.
All I wanted is to move on and I never wanted to hurt anybody. I thought that being in this administrative role would be a way for me to be in this field and help without the credentials, but I could still help a field I deeply cared about, and that was delusional, Your Honor.
But her words didn't convince Livingston County Judge Suzanne Geddes, who doubled her sentence, exceeding the guidelines to 4.5 to 7 years in prison, wishing it could have been longer.
That's not a mistake. This is a conniving, intentional, motivated by greed situation, and I'm sorry that any and all of you were affected by that.
Since my report, the facility has since changed its name to the Oxford Center and removed any sign of Code and Diskin's work on their social media and website. For the parents, this sentence was a sense of vindication, but they say will never be enough to restore their children who suffered physically and emotionally.
So I think that we feel relief today. This has been 3 years coming now. And this is justice for my son, for all of these kids. And I hope that this does shed light publicly so that this doesn't happen again.
I'm hoping this is a public display of what happens when you do something like this to these vulnerable children.
There's definitely some relief. I'm glad we were able to speak, that the judge let us all speak and tell our stories, talk for our kids, because they can't speak for themselves.
I think it helps knowing that she's going to be in prison. And hopefully, I'm just going to go on record and say, hopefully the co-conspirator that the judge mentioned, I think that will help a lot of us with the remaining closure needed for this. Our children will forever be impacted by their experience there.
Yeah, the co-conspirator mentioned in court, I learned, is the Oxford Recovery Center COO, Tammy Peterson. Sources tell me she is under investigation. And after our story aired, Attorney General Dana Nessel, who is the one who green-lighted the investigation after local police agencies and Michigan State Police denied the complaints filed by parents. Now, she issued a statement, and in part it reads, falsifying credentials to gain access to highly vulnerable population is unethical and reprehensible. She hopes this sentence serves as a warning to others.
When choosing a new insurance carrier, the decision sometimes comes down to...
So, now, that woman, not only was she extorting me for money, and I don't know if you noticed the look on her face in the courtroom, that's far different from what she looked like when I saw her in person back in 2019, 20, and 21. But she was actually screaming in my face. I could not have sound. My brain was sagging. I had 2 brain injuries, knots of carbon monoxide loaded up inside my brain. I was trying to reteach myself how to talk while the people around me were always screaming in my home, acting like there was never any injury. Due to my deranged mother telling everyone around me that I always had a mental disorder, there was no physical injury. And she pulled that off because of how she prevented us from getting treatment within the traditional medical system, and no one ever saw me incapacitated in a facility. I was incapacitated at home without help. So, you know, with all those knots of carbon monoxide, my brain sagging, the amount of carbon monoxide in every breath and every nerve in my brain was constantly throbbing and shooting, and all of that was going on at one time for me for those 3 years. And when she was screaming in my face, all of this stuff, she was like screaming webs of lies about how it works and how I'm going to do this and that. And I'm thinking, like, that's not how that works, lady. Like, I know exactly how this stuff works, and what you're saying isn't how it works. And but I couldn't spit out the words due to the brain injuries and the condition I was in. I knew exactly what I was thinking and what I was trying to say, but the words couldn't come out of my mouth in the manner in which I needed them to, due to how extreme and urgent my injuries were. That's why it's called a medical emergency. So that went on with her and I for, it was almost 2 years. And not only that, but she had taken me aside numerous times as well, and tried to do the same thing. And I just kept telling the lady at the front desk that that's not how that works. Like, I knew she had no idea how any of it worked, but I was trying to tell her, I said, she's wrong. That's not how that works. This is how it works. And I had told her numerous times about whatever was wrong, about whatever I was being told. So this information was being relayed back to Tammy Peterson, and then she would allow Casey Diskin to continue to extort me and say and do these things to me. Now, that was just one incident, you know, like, or one of the, well, I guess it was 16 incidences. It was all in one arrest. All of those charges were put together in one. Now with that case, that situation, none of what happened to me was included in any of that. I did try to make a phone call to the Attorney General at the time the case came out in September of 21. And I did not get anywhere with it. They weren't understanding the extreme nature of my condition when this was going on and what was being asked of me. And it wasn't just extortion. I was near death, unable to produce money, completely incapacitated, being extorted for the money. And so was my son. So I was in an impossible situation. And they were understanding the extreme nature of how severely injured I was, how bad it really was, because they're either listening at that time, either listening to what I was talking like or looking at what I looked like, instead of the actual state of the condition I was in. So that was another issue. And eventually she was removed from my portion of the billing, and then she was arrested. I believe it was beginning of September or end of August of 2021. And then Tammy Peterson allowed her to stay for 2 additional weeks at the facility and work, even though all this had come out. And that's when the news showed up, and then she had to fire her. So there's more to what's going on than I'm aware of. The fact that Tammy let her stay an additional 2 weeks. I believe it was 2 weeks. It was either 1 week or 2 weeks. So that all happened. And at the same time, Dr. Bogner was their doctor on staff. I do believe he split off, and he is independently owned and operated at this point. I think he's an OBGYN, but he also has a special interest in kids with autism. He has great knowledge in hyperbaric oxygen therapy. He's very well educated on everything he does specialize in. I know that. I've spoke to him numerous times. I've spoke to many providers during my entire injury. No help from any of them. And I did, 2 other medical professionals I encountered along the way, did have some pretty good information and knowledge and understanding of what I was going through and the treatments themselves. And they were not actually providers I was seeing. One was a holistic dentist. One was it was a holistic doctor who was doing Reiki, acupuncture, and several other things. And those were the only 2 people I found educated enough on what was going on and what I was going through, and if I was ever going to get through it, or if there would ever be a light at the end of the tunnel, because at the time I was speaking to them, I did not know. Now, then there was Dr. Bogner. So I had numerous encounters with him. He did have that well of an education and knowledge on everything as well. So he was the only one who participated in anything that had anything to do with any of my care, who was any type of knowledgeable on anything going on during that time period. So Dr. Bogner did know what he was talking about. I do believe his site is up there. Maybe I'll do an episode and read what he's written. But he was not responsible for anything that was going on within that building. I do believe they were intimidating. He was the witness. She was intimidating. And I was also one of them. I just wasn't ever able to talk because we were still treating up until the explosion recently. So Dr. Bogner removed himself, I believe, once he figured out how shady some of the things they were doing. I'm not sure to what degree he figured out exactly, because I believe it was July 21st or July 22nd of 2021. And then she wasn't arrested for another 5 or 6 weeks. So I'm not sure exactly why there was such a difference in the time period. It was something, but he removed himself, and he had nothing to do with these women or their actions either. So, he is a really good doctor. He's a good guy. He knows exactly what he's talking about. I don't doubt, anything that he's saying. And I would not normally say that about most medical professionals. But if you do come across Dr. Bogner, I don't know where he's operating now, somewhere in Michigan doing something on his own. But he is very knowledgeable. He is very respected. And I don't know exactly what transpired between all of them, but it was not good. And those 2 women were in the wrong for whatever was done to him. And he had no knowledge of anything, extravagant. And I believe once he figured out something that extravagant was going on, he removed himself, is what I'm pretty sure happened. So maybe we'll figure out more on that later. But I just wanted to do the first episode on Casey Diskin because I had numerous negative encounters with this woman, threats to my life from this woman. I was not sure if she could pull the plug to my chamber behind the wall. I was not sure. And I came in there in such an extreme fright that I had actually told one of the attendants, I had asked him if anybody had ever died in one, and then asked him if anybody ever died after, because I was in such extreme distress with so much overloaded carbon monoxide in my brain and my system that it was very hard to get in that chamber and do a treatment and come out, because I was so severely overloaded with carbon monoxide in such an extreme state of suffocation. It was very hard to do. because it's pressurizing those toxins through your entire system in your brain, and it's coming out in reverse. So you're suffocating in reverse while you're in there under pressure. And even though you're in 100% oxygen, it's very extreme. So it's very hard to get through. And I stayed that way for those first 3 years and going through a treatment day by day. So, you know, I did have to ask about that after she had made that threat. And the guy who was running the chambers at the time, his name was Sam. I did trust his opinion. I did, you know, trust him as a person running the chambers, because you can kind of tell treating long term if the person on the outside has any knowledge or not of, you know, how it all works, or if they're doing their job properly. You can kind of tell. So I did trust him. He was a good person to have been in my care, taking care of my care at that time, in that time period when my injury was the most extreme. So I don't remember his last name, but he was a good person as well. I do believe he was an EMT before that, and I do believe he had previous hyperbaric oxygen facility skills on his resume from some other place. So other than that, nothing but negative experiences, other than the fact that I did have to, you know, that is how I removed the carbon monoxide. That is how I reversed the brain injuries. That is how I got my son better. That's how I got myself better. I did have to follow whatever they were telling me, or we weren't going to survive either way you looked at it. So I just had to follow along and keep my mouth shut. So I'm coming out now, and I'm talking now. Now that the place is entirely shut down, it never will be reopened. Now I can tell my story. So that's just the first part of it. I'm going to come back with more on Tammy Peterson, and then I'll probably come back with another one on Dr. Bogner and the work that he's currently doing, because I do believe I found some information on him. So I'll be back with another one. Thank you.